chemical farmers and growers, the word used to describe them is conventional. That's always jarred with me because you look up conventional, that word in the dictionary, and it means normal and natural. There's a hidden agenda, which I feel is insidious actually, because things are never declared for what they really are. There's definitely been a move by government linked to corporations against farmers, but it's not being stated why.
This man has over 50 million downloads on YouTube, nearly 500,000 followers on Instagram. He's known all over the world for the tremendous work that he's doing, not just for growers and farmers, but for everyday people, teaching them how to look after their land and the importance of why we need to do so.
Growing is not easy. I would even say that growing vegetables is actually not a natural thing to do. So we've got to work to get the soil ready for them, and that's where the no-dig and compost comes in, and being on top of weeds and all that kind of thing. But it's achievable. We're seeing now the value of the soil biome, as it's called, the microbes in the soil, and how similar they are to the biome. I don't believe in what's called climate change or what's called global warming. I've been keeping weather records, for example, since 1973, so it's over 50 years. And what I would say is there's just more extreme weather events now.
Imagine this. A weekend surrounded by nature's beauty in the heart of the English woodlands. A shimmering lake at sunset. Movie night under the stars, with turmeric and black pepper popcorn in hand. World-renowned health advocate Barbara O'Neill live, empowering you to take back control of your health. Plus a powerhouse lineup of expert speakers, wellness workshops, and soul-nourishing experiences. This isn't just a festival, it's a movement, and you don't want to miss out. The Wellness Way Festival, where nature, knowledge, and community collide. Save the date, August the 8th to the 10th, 2025. Tickets are limited, so sign up to my newsletter on phillyjlay.com so you can be the first to know all the updates. Come and join the wellness revolution, because as you know, the doctor of your future is you.
Welcome to The Wellness Way with me, Philly J. Lay, a layperson's guide to your natural health systems, your very own NHS.
Hello, lovely people, and welcome to another episode of The Wellness Way. And I cannot tell you how excited I am for this one. As a grower's daughter, having grown up on the land, this is a man that completely revolutionized my life when I discovered him on YouTube many years ago with no-dig gardening. I don't even need to tell you his name, do I? But this man has over 50 million downloads on YouTube, nearly 500,000 followers on Instagram. He's known all over the world for the tremendous work that he's doing, not just for growers and farmers, but for everyday people, teaching them how to look after their land and the importance of why we need to do so. So without further ado, Charles Dowding, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, hi, Philly. Oh, well, thanks very much for that very warm welcome. And yeah, I'm raring to go.
Oh, brilliant. I'd like to start with why you got into gardening. What was it in your childhood, your early years, that got you into gardening?
Well, I was lucky enough to grow up on a farm, but the kind of farming that was going on didn't really appeal to me. That was driving tractors and handling cows. It was a dairy farm and growing crops and using machinery. I don't like using machinery. It's taken me a while to work out all of that kind of thing, because to get away from something you're in is harder than kind of starting afresh. But anyway, I became vegetarian when I was at university, and that was a good trigger to get interested in growing plants, because I wanted to eat well. I was always a bit interested in nutrition, I reckon, although I didn't really enjoy vegetables much until I was about 15. I can remember still that first taste of broad beans. Yeah, I know, it's like broad beans that my mother had grown in her garden. So she had a garden, and that gave me a chance to get out there and try a few things. But I didn't really get interested in doing much myself until my last year at university, which is 1979. And I helped my mother plant some trees, and I just still remember that feeling there was something connecting within me in doing that. And oddly enough, that was digging holes to plant the trees, but working with the soil and plants. And then, together with my interest in nutrition and eating well, that led me to also having no interest in doing any of the other sort of jobs. I was at Cambridge, in fact, so I was getting good offers of potential work, jobs, salary jobs, that kind of thing. But none of it appealed to me, and I just thought, what am I going to do? And then I realised I could grow food commercially, so I started a market garden in 1982.
Wow. You talked about being vegetarian in 1979. I turned vegetarian in 1980, and we were kind of thought of as weirdos, weren't we? Were you? I was.
Yeah, yeah. My father thought I was a rabbit. Yeah, totally.
Nothing
And
wrong with a
and so
rabbit.
the yeah, no, well, sure. But also ultimately I came to organic because I that was what I wanted, health and wellness, to borrow your phrase, and in my food, and so organic made sense. And then I was learning about that, and then reading some of their old journals. A few people talked about something they called not digging. The phrase no dig wasn't used it back then, and that got me interested too. And I just thought about soil and how we could work it better or not work it rather. And it's difficult with language. Most of the language always is pushing you to say, "Hey, let's dig in here," that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I'm all for keeping it simple as well, using no machinery, and no dig results in fewer weeds because you're mulching rather than stirring up the soil. And it all just came together during 1983 in my first year when I'd had read a book by an American gardener called Ruth Stout, and it's called No Work Gardening. Came out in 1971. And she's from what I subsequently found to be a very dry state, Connecticut, where they don't have slugs. But anyway, she recommended mulching with hay. And the hay mulch works really well to smother weeds and feed the soil organisms, but it does encourage slugs. So I then needed to adapt that method. Her principle of no-till, as she called it, being American, is brilliant. So I just switched to no dig, but using compost as my mulch, because compost is a mulch and doesn't encourage slugs. It doesn't give habitat to them. And from there on, I've been refining that method and finding out more about it. There's always so much more to find out.
There is always more to find out. It's kind of every day's a school day, isn't it, with growing? My mum used to say that growing was a work of art, and every day you painted on your drawing board, and it changed and it evolved, and that's kind of what it is. I want to come on to the Soil Association because you were one of the first people to join the Soil Association, weren't you?
Well, no, actually, I'll just make sure I get the facts right. It was founded in 1946 by Lady Eve Balfour, who was granddaughter of trying to think, it was Arthur Balfour, I think, who was Prime Minister at the turn of the century. So she came from a very aristocratic lineage, but became a vegetarian at age 15. She was, in the stately home, and someone shot a pheasant. Apparently, this is the story. It landed at her feet, and she thought, "I don't want to be part of this," and so she became vegetarian. But in those days, that's like revolutionary. That must have been 1920 something. No, even less. She was born in 1898. Anyway, she founded this amazing association, and it was people very like-minded who, I think probably had similar views to what many of us have now. They wanted health from the land. But I feel it got a bit corrupted going forwards by having to become a body with a constitution, and then also needing to campaign. For example, following the publication of Silent Spring in 1963, I think it was, by Rachel Carson, that meant there was a lot of campaigning against use of chemicals, and it became as much about avoiding chemicals as about encouraging the positive health through soil and those linkages there. So when I joined it, that part of it was a bit distant, and I was keen to get it back. And no dig really slots into that. Health from the land. That was the first sign I put up by my market garden to advertise what I was doing. It literally said "health from the land." That was in 1983, and so I've been growing in that way myself for a long time, and I feel the Soil Association has sort of come back a bit to its original manifesto, and they weren't talking much about soil then. I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying this, but I'm just saying it as I see it. And now, soil is a hot topic, thank goodness, and everybody's talking about soil. So we're in a good place at least.
I think that's why I thought you were one of the kind of pioneers of it, because you were one of the first people that I came across. My father used to write a lot of letters to Doubleday. I can't remember because I
Oh
was
yeah,
little.
Henry Doubleday Research Association. That was Lawrence
Yes.
Hills.
Yes, I remember he used to kind of Sunday nights, every Sunday night, my mum would get her typewriter out and type, and my dad would write another letter to Doubleday in a time
Brilliant.
that the UK, so my dad, for anybody that doesn't know, came back from World War II as a pilot, and he'd saved just enough money to buy 5 acres of land, which is where I was born. And he had enough money to plant up strawberries. And then the UK got a disease called red core. Do you remember red core?
Yeah, I'd forgotten about it, but now you mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, and it was wiping out all the strawberry growers in the UK. But Dad, by the end of the first season, so the first kind of picking season, end of May, beginning of June, Dad didn't have any money to hire anybody to pick. And him and Mum used to run out there at 6 o'clock in the morning, picking all they could, and then Mum would drive it to Oxford Market. And they were just watching the fruit rotting on the plants. And so my mum said, I've got an idea. And she went inside and she painted a board and came out and said, I'm just going to pop this on the main road, Philip. And it just said, pick your own. And that was the beginning of Pick Your Own Strawberries in the UK. And my dad,
Brilliant.
yeah, I know,
Wow.
it was so simple. And my dad worked tirelessly to find a cure for red core, and he came across something, and he was so excited because it was working miracles. And so he went to ICI, and I think they were up in Doncaster, which was a long way from Brightwell-cum-Sotwell, and it was this whole family outfit, outing. Dad was going to take this miracle cure, and they said, oh, that's fantastic, Mr. Lay, absolutely fantastic. We don't have a lot of money, so we're just going to give you a very small advance, but we're giving you a very large percentage of sales. So Dad thought, that's okay. And they buried it, as these chemical companies do. But the cure it was literally Epsom salts and seaweed. And that is all it takes, is to understand your soil and to understand what your soil needs and to feed it properly. Do you agree, Charles?
Yeah, very much. I mean, but brilliant on him to work out such a simple formula, which is not harmful to soil life, because Epsom salt's magnesium sulfate, which actually, I put on my raspberries because sometimes they get a big magnesium deficient. It's only soft fruit. I don't use it for any vegetables or anything, and I'm not in that way of thinking really. But I think fruiting plants are different because they're in one place for a long time and take a lot of stuff out, and so you can get these imbalances.
So you mentioned raspberries there. So I'm a big proponent of putting my wood ash from the fire on raspberries. Do you know that one?
Well, yeah, but I'm not convinced it's such a good idea because I think that relates to the potassium in wood ash being good for fruiting plants, for fruit generally. But it depends when you do it. I wouldn't do it until the summer, otherwise it'll wash out with rain. But if you put it on, say, from uh, May onwards, or June even, that would be the time I would use it. And in fact, the snag with that is, that's not when you're burning your logs. So I actually put my wood ash in the compost heap because I feel that that way it's getting into the loop of the nutrients and everything for the garden. It's one way of doing it.
That is a really good tip. I'd never thought of doing that. Bless you. That's where my ash is going now. Definitely in the compost heap. I want to come back to the Soil Association a bit because they did, I think, lose their way. I'm a member of the Soil Association because I don't really understand why, when we go into a supermarket, organic food has to be labeled organic when it's grown from the soil naturally, and chemical food, they don't have to list the many chemicals that they've sprayed on it. Now, there is a lot of people have a slight problem with the Soil Association because they do allow some chemicals, don't they? Can you talk us through this?
Well, yeah, I'm a bit out of the loop, to be honest. So I can't, I know what I know, but I'm not saying it's the ultimate. But I did have a soil association symbol in the 1980s. Then I moved to France actually, so I didn't need it anymore. I had the equivalent one over there for my small farm in France. And when I came back to the UK, I decided I didn't need it because I'm selling locally only. And when you're selling locally, your customers know you. There's no point in paying. Now it would be roughly £500 a year to be accredited organic, as you put it. It should be the other way around. It should be the guys using chemicals who have to pay to sell their stuff, with some kind of certificate of what they put on it.
Mm.
In a sensible world, that just would be obvious. But we've somehow got into the reverse situation, which, like anything, once something has sort of got in place and it's got a certain momentum to it, people don't question it anymore. But I think anyone coming to it initially would. And I said this to Patrick Holden, actually, who was director of the Soil Association about 15 years ago, maybe 20, actually, it could be 25 even, that I was saying this to him. Yeah, more likely. And I said to him, why shouldn't it be the other way around? And shouldn't we, because at the moment, and it still happens that chemical farmers and growers, the word used to describe them is conventional. And that's always jarred with me because you look up conventional, that word in the dictionary, and it means normal and natural. So, hang on a minute, this is not right. It's normal and natural to be using glyphosate and pesticides, God knows what else. And so they should be called chemical. I said to Patrick, they should be called chemical farmers, and organic should not need a name. It's just farming or gardening. And what he said was interesting. He said, yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying. But he said, if we do that, they're not going to want to talk to us so much. We're still trying. This is what he said, that we're still trying to kind of get them on board. This would have been around the year 2000. So my reply was, well, how long are you going to go on doing that? Because I'd been in the Soil Association conferences and things since 1984, and in those days we had slogan 20% organic by 2000. 20% of organic food produced in Britain would be organic by the year 2000. When we actually got to 2000, it was 3%. So there was a huge discrepancy between the talk and the ambition, the aims, and what was actually happening on the ground. I don't think anyone was really quick enough to adjust to that. And organic has stayed, unfortunately, small and niche. Again, some people will disagree. It's good to have a debate about the things. I say how I see it. But because of that, this way of classifying it, what you've just said, it's put on the margin. It's labelled as an extra, and it should be main, and it should be the other guys who are much more emphatically made to say what they're doing and made to justify it, and things like the hidden costs of pesticides and nitrates, all the stuff in the water. Who's going to pay to clean that up? It's ultimately okay. So it grows cheap food, and people say we couldn't have cheap food without this stuff, but it's not cheap in the end, because if you're polluting the environment and have to pay to rectify that, the food is actually much more expensive than it looks. And that is called true cost accounting, which is now, and Patrick is actually at the forefront of this to bring it in, which is brilliant through his sustainable food and farming program. So there's all these things going on, but it always comes back to me to the pace of progress is so slow. And these guys, the chemical farmers and government, it must be said, corporations, they're very good at talking, and they will say, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, right, okay. Well, let's go and have a meeting about it and do this, that, and the other. Nothing actually happens. I've seen this pattern so often in my life. I'm 66 now, so I've seen the wheel go around a few times. And you sort of realize that no, nothing is going to happen either. So we've somehow, well, we need to be, and we are getting more proactive. I would say, I feel like with No Dig that it's a very positive thing, but it doesn't have a structure. Unlike, say, in the organic movement, you had various associations like Henry Doubleday Research Association. Then you get committees, you get meetings, you get quarterly reports, blah blah blah. I feel that all of that is actually preventing progress, and also that sort of setup attracts people who love that kind of setup, and not
Yeah.
necessarily people who are the movers and shakers who are going to get it all together and actually change things. Because a lot of the people who get involved, then they have a vested interest in this, that, and the other, and so no dig. I resist it. I say we just keep it open. There's no exact definition of no dig or code of standards, that kind of thing. It's just two principles: disturb the soil
Yeah.
as little as possible,
I
feed the
love
soil
that.
life with a mulch on top.
Yeah,
That's
I
it.
love that. I love
And
that.
in
It's so
so many ways.
simple, and it works. I'm a big fan of weeds. I harvest and eat a lot of weeds, and a weed is only a plant in the wrong place. But when you're trying to grow good vegetables, your stinging nettles can take all the nutrients from that soil, and just by putting down the cardboard and the mulch, then you're just holding that back so that your plants can grow, aren't you?
Yeah, and not only that, but there's another really important point in doing that. It's saving you time. Going back to what your father found, it's flipping hard work growing food, and especially if you're doing it commercially, but even on an amateur basis, what we're all short of, I would say, is more than anything, is time.
Mm.
And so these quicker ways of doing things, like say mulching with cardboard initially, it's only the beginning, just one off to give yourself the clean canvas to paint on, as you put it, and then you save so much time going forward. So what I'm doing consciously is always looking for ways to save time, which goes outside no dig a bit as well, like in terms of not worrying about a 4-year rotation, for example. Things that have been seen to be a bit gospel before. It's just questioning everything. I don't harden off my plants straight out of the greenhouse into the ground, but I put fleece over if it's cold. All of that is a lot quicker. So those are the kinds of things I'm also really looking at. But weeds is the biggest one. I say a lot of people spend a lot of time weeding and they don't need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk then about kind of putting the plants straight into the soil, putting a bit of fleece on and everything. Um, do you have a greenhouse, and presumably you grow under glass, and do you have polythene tunnels?
Yeah, I have one polytunnel, 18 by 42 feet, and one of 10 by 15 feet. And the greenhouse is 12 by 25 feet. And in the greenhouse, about a third of the space is for propagation, which is for half an acre, which is 2,000 square meters nearly. And I'm using I've needed to invent module trays basically because I wanted trays that were much smaller than surface area than the ones that are commonly used, and also much more durable and robust so they don't fall apart when you're trying to get the plants out, and also the plants slide out really easily. So it's very feasible to put the plants in small. That means there's a rapid throughput in the greenhouse. I need much less propagation space. So the whole thing is a kind of system that fits together. Well, I don't often phrase it like that, but I'm just pointing always at the individual aspects that people
Well,
can take
the
to
reason
make their own work.
yeah, the reason I ask actually was one of the first people I interviewed on the podcast was Guy Singh Watson from Riverford Farms, and he'd done some research that it was actually worse for the environment to grow in the UK, and for our, and I'm going to put it in inverted commas, our carbon footprint, to grow under glass and polytunnels in the UK rather than to grow in, say, France or Spain and then import it. That it used a lot more. I mean, it's very different what you're doing because you're propagating, and that's has to be done. I have a living room, but that I do it in, but you can't do that on a larger scale. Would you agree with him on that? That growing under polytunnels and glass isn't as environmentally
Yeah,
friendly?
quite emphatically not actually. But just to be clear at the beginning, one always needs to define what is meant by, in this case, worse for the environment. I mean, do you know what criteria he was using? Because that's a very vague term.
I don't know, but I know that he very much believes in climate change and global warming, which is something that I don't believe in personally.
Yeah,
So, what are your thoughts
that's
on
what
that,
I wondered
Charles?
because that's why I say though you've got to be clear. Worse for the environment. Well, what about? Um, oh yeah, she's quite
Have I
hard
put you
to.
on the spot?
Yeah, well, not exactly. I'm sorry how to phrase it. That Basically, I don't believe in what's called climate change or what's called global warming either. I know that one can always find evidence to support those phrases, but oh God, I've got so much cutting the other way. Oh, there is. And I've been keeping weather records, for example, since 1973, so it's over 50 years. And what I would say is they're just more extreme weather events now. And that's a totally different thing to suddenly converting that into what's called climate change. And yeah, I don't like the way that all the other environmental factors have got lost in the so-called emphasis on carbon. Carbon is pretty much the only environmental factor that seems to be taken into account now. And just in terms of growing your own in a polytunnel, what about all the health benefits from the microbes of eating fresh food? I don't want to eat imported food that's spent a day on a lorry coming from France or Spain. What about that? That is a significant environmental factor, not only for the lorry, but more for the microbes. That it's looking at things in a very easily quantifiable, mechanistic way. Analytical reductionist, which is what modern science does, and you isolate one variable, in this case carbon, and say, well, that's using more carbon. Well, I don't think it is, but I'd be happy to have that debate. But
Okay,
now we know much more.
I'd like you to have that debate because we're made up of carbon. Our trees need carbon. That's how they give us oxygen. And I think the first time I truly understood this was a movie called Kiss the Ground. Have you seen Kiss the Ground?
Yeah.
Phenomenal movie.
Yeah, well, that links to what I've found here. I'm doing these trials of two beds side by side, and one I dig every December and incorporate the compost, and the other one has the same amount of compost spread on top. So there's many variables always in growing, but if you can have a trial where you can isolate one variable, then that can tell you something maybe. And so it's the same compost, the same vegetables, everything's the same except one bed is dug and one is no dig. So it's isolating that one possible change. And I've been doing that for 12 years. This is 13th year now. And last January, I had a PhD student measure the carbon content of the soil in the two beds. And he found that in the bed I dig every December, there was 14% carbon, which is very high. So it's a good result. That's reflecting the compost I dig in this case. And in the no dig bed, which has the same amount of compost but spread on top, there is 18%. So 4% more carbon with no dig. And if we go back to, your friend's assertion that growing your own in a polytunnel is much worse for the environment, as he puts it. Yeah, it must be. If you're looking at carbon, the fact that if you're no dig, well, you're solving that one. You're keeping the carbon in the soil. That's the beauty of no dig. And I'm not saying that because I'm worried about CO2, but more because that's the basis of soil fertility is carbon-based compounds, and it's the basis of all life in the soil, and sugars, and all of that kind of thing that plants create through photosynthesis, and they exude them through their roots in a process called symbiosis, and then the mycorrhizal network and the bacteria come and feed on them. So that's carbon-based food, and in return the networks and the bacteria find food and moisture for the plants. So there's beautiful structure in the soil and process going on, all based on carbon, and that's what we want in the soil.
This is something that I found quite shocking over the last year, especially under the Labour government. They're talking about spending 22 million on a piece of machinery that is a carbon capturer, when you could plant a forest. But they seem to be wanting to do this. You've seen a huge kind of increase in national newspapers, like the Daily Mail, who did a big feature that I looked at recently on how people gardening in their own gardens is bad for the environment.
Well,
Don't
I'm
get
afraid that there's I have to conclude there's a movement to put us down. To put anyone growing their own food to make them feel bad, and it's so wrong, because again it's based on carbon, and they're using that same phrase, it's bad for the environment, and so we've got to be really clear. Well, I'm really clear, and I hope your listeners are from hearing this. That it's not. It's about much more than carbon, and we actually, with no dig, you are keeping the carbon in the ground. So growing your own no dig at home, that's brilliant for the environment. End of story, as far as I'm concerned.
What some people are saying, and I have a sister who watches the mainstream media. Um, do I need to say more? Big fan of yours, by the way. But she does feel that when we were children, and she's older than me, but I was born in 1963, and when we were kids, and you spoke about your mum having a garden. My mum had a garden. I had a garden. I was given it for my birthday one year. It was just like my parents had no money, so they just kind of put out a little bit of land and went, "That's your garden, go dig it, love." And we got plants off other people. We grew our own plants. We kept our own seeds. We did our own seed banks, and now this is the argument against it. A lot of people will go and buy railway sleepers and do raised beds, and then they'll go to the garden centre and get a load of plants all in plastic pots, things we didn't really have when I was a child. What are your thoughts on that? How does it balance between what is right and what is wrong?
Well, I would say everything you said there is correct, but you don't need to grow with railway sleepers or wooden sides to your beds. You don't need to go to a garden centre and get plants in pots. You can. We need to relearn all these basic skills. That's why I wrote one of my books. It's called Skills, and just trying to put this information out there. I find teaching and through YouTube videos and that, and just showing on the videos that really helps people because I can see there's a whole generation that missed it. And so, exactly as you say, the skills that people would have learned from their parents, they haven't. And when they come to actually garden, what are they going to do? So by default, yeah, maybe they're doing those things you described, but that's not an argument against growing your own, though. That's an argument about getting more informed, motivated. There's got to be a certain commitment and motivation to this. It's not going to happen otherwise. Growing is not easy. I would even say that growing vegetables is actually not a natural thing to do. You don't go out in nature and have a walk and suddenly you stumble across carrots and lettuce growing, happily, that kind of thing. And vegetables are slightly unnatural plants. So we've got to work to get the soil ready for them. And that's where the no-dig and compost comes in and being on top of weeds and all that kind of thing. But it's achievable. And I get this comment so many times, actually, on social media, YouTube, Instagram, mainly, Facebook, actually, as well. And people saying, well, I was an absolute beginner and I just watch your videos for a year or I watch them every so often, pick up the tips I need enough, and they're succeeding. And that really warms my heart, but it shows it's possible. But then a few other people will say, well, it didn't work for me. Okay, well, fair enough. Then, maybe they missed the bit about your mulching bindweed or couch grass. And the initial cardboard mulch doesn't kill it, unfortunately, where you've got persistent perennial weed. So, I make videos about this to explain it. But I can see how that could get missed. And so they don't follow up removing the regrowth, and then the couch grass just takes over again. So it's like, oh, no, it doesn't work. No, it's just the way you do it. So that these details need learning. And everybody, all of us need that sense of intent and commitment, which can only come from us. But I think for instance, recent research on nutrition really helps because we're seeing now the value of the soil biome, as it's called, the microbes in the soil and how similar they are to the gut biome. And so even if you can only grow a little bit of your own food, you're going to notice that significant difference in your health. You're going to be happier, feel stronger, you can be more alert mentally. Who would not want any of that? So when you maybe get that feeling and understanding, that will help, any new gardener, I feel, to get involved. You just got to make that first step sometimes.
I think it's more important now than it has been probably since World War II, where we, grew our gardens, we grew our food. I think we're actually at the moment in history where this is the second most important time in history that we have to do this. We're seeing our farmers coming under attack like never before. This absolutely insane inheritance tax on family farms are going to take those generational farms, out of their families. And these farmers don't earn a lot of money. They really earn very little. I mean, I watched Jeremy Clarkson's On the Farm, and at the end of his first year he made 37 quid or something. I mean, it's for all that work, and it's 365 days of the year, and whatever the weather, Christmas Day you're out there. It doesn't stop. It's relentless. But they have to have expensive kit. There are harvesters and all this hugely expensive kit that they have to have, and they're getting hammered. And there's been a lot in social media recently: no farmers, no food. And I made a post end of last year and said, no farmers, no food. Yes, there will be food, and it'll be grown in laboratories by the powers that be, and it will be toxic for our health. And I absolutely believe that this is what's going to happen to the food supply. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid I have to agree with you. There's a hidden agenda, which I feel is insidious, actually, because things are never declared for what they really are. There's definitely been a move by government linked to corporations against farmers, but it's not being stated why. What's wrong with farming? Why are you trying to get rid of farmers, in fact? And as you say, I think it's money behind it, and they can then control the food supply through whatever horrible means they have. So I'm not. All I feel is you can't control the levers of power. We're not going to suddenly be able to stop them doing that. But what we can do is enable people through at ground level, grassroots, to grow their own and not be influenced by these so-called studies that we've been talking about, claiming that it's worse for the environment, that kind of thing, because that's all part of it. They really chip away. And you've got to kind of close your ears sometimes to all that nonsense, and stay firm in the core belief and core knowledge. Growing your own is really good for you.
There are also benefits with the gut biome as well. I mean, this is singularly one of the most important things with your own food. As you said, very often vegetables, fruit can be on a truck, for a week. They harvest the fruit before it's ripe, so that it's ripe when it arrives in the supermarkets. And so you're losing all the wonderful polyphenols and everything that your gut needs. If there was kind of one tip that you would give a gardener on harvesting your food, when do you think is the right time?
Oh, do you mean the right time of day, for example?
Well, the right time for your gut. When is it at the optimal health benefit on the plant? Is it slightly green and you're ripening it in the house? Is it, absolutely perfectly right? Do you get more polyphenols and benefits if you over ripen it, like tomatoes? What's your advice on that?
Actually, I'm not too worried about the precise ripeness because, funnily enough, tomatoes, they're an exception. They do ripen quite well off the plant, and that's why it's feasible to do. Most other plants, though, vegetables, we're eating a lot of green leaves, and I would say the main thing is to have them fresh, so it's not you pick them and eat them within a few hours often, and then you're going to get the highest microbial count. Even the act of picking them, you're sort of coming in contact with these beautiful bacteria, Bacillus vacci, which your body needs to make serotonin in your brain. So that's why it feels good, or one reason why it feels good to be in the garden. So you're getting double benefit of actually harvesting and then eating them. And I would warmly recommend it if anybody's not yet growing and you eat, as long as you eat and want to eat some green leaves, just leaves of lettuce in the summer and rocket and mizuna in the winter and those kind of things, plants that are seasonally adapted to wherever you are. That's the easiest way to get really healthy microbes and food quality. Grow your own leaves.
Okay, I got a question for you, Charles. My rocket is going absolutely wild this year, but the bugs are loving it and it's got little holes over it. I think it's better to eat. I kind of figure if the bugs are enjoying it, then it's good for me too. So I don't worry about that. But we live in a world where everybody expects food to look absolutely perfect now. We've lost the ability to understand that, this is part of nature and it doesn't look perfect. And I mean, a prime example of this was when my brother Dave took over the land at 5 acres. There was a large chain. They were then a clothes store, they were most famous for, and then they became a food store, and they became very prominent in the food chain. And my brother put a consortium of growers together in our village to supply this chain. And Dave was growing lettuce, and then there was the sheared boy was growing cherries, so everybody had their thing that they were growing. And I remember a class A1 lettuce went up in that period, within a few weeks only. It went from 4 ounces to 12 ounces. And that takes an awful lot of chemicals to do that, and to make it look pretty and make it not look eaten. And I used to watch David going up and down the fields, and he wore a mask when he had his sprayer on, as he was spraying all these chemicals. But on a hot summer's day, he was without a t-shirt, not knowing that the skin was the largest organ of the body. And within 2 years, he was dead from cancer, as were all the other young men in our village. They all died. It was a whole generation of young men that were wiped out as growers
That
in
is,
order to make this food look pretty.
yeah, yeah, that's tragic. I've had experience myself of selling to supermarkets, and it's not fun, and that's why I stopped in the late 80s, because we would send off a van load of lettuce, say, and as far as I was aware, it met the criteria they'd asked for, but then I get a note 2 days later, sorry, we couldn't use this lettuce because we found some slugs. And the leeks, that they rejected the whole load because one was too long. That kind of thing. So you're very on the back foot yourself, even in the way the whole structure is set up. But it's really tragic to hear that about your brother and all his mates. I'd like to think we moved on to business then, but actually not a lot. It's still going on, that kind of thing, I'm sure. It's more, it's been moved out to the third world where we don't see it, sadly. And that is on the imported food. That, going back to that study thing, we're better off importing food than growing your own. You've got to grow your own. It's for your own health, it's for the health of the environment, and it's for the health of everybody. And often when growing your own, you end up growing more than you need. There's a nice saying in France along those lines. To grow enough, you've got to grow too much. You can't be that precise. Nature isn't like that. And then you'll be able to share it out with your neighbours and friends, and you'll make friends with neighbouring people, and the benefits just kind of keep multiplying. So yeah, just going back to your rocket though, I think probably you're growing salad rocket, and it's not made clear on the seed packets that salad rocket flowers in the summer months. I mean, we're in late May now, and so that's what it's doing is normal, and also the insects that eat it are more prevalent in April and May than they are in the winter. So the best time to sow salad rocket is August. That's what I do and always recommend. And then you will have it cropping much more healthily without going to seed for several months, even through winter if it's mild.
Brilliant. Okay. I think I did sow it at the wrong time. I just wanted some rocket because I eat a lot of rocket. It's in my seed bed, and the other half of my seed bed is dandelions because I eat a lot of dandelion leaves. And later on in the year, I'll harvest the roots for my teas all winter. Okay, I'll try and get the timing right on that one. So I have some very exciting news for my audience today, because the Wellness Way is putting on its first festival. I am so excited to be doing this and slightly nervous, I'm not going to lie. It's a huge undertaking. But you, Charles Dowding, are one of my headliners, and I can't say how grateful I am to you for coming along and sharing your wisdom. And I know that you have a new book out. I mean, you have hundreds of books out, but you have a new book out. And I know that you're going to come along to the festival and talk about that book and do some book signings, I hope. So can you tell us what this, don't give too much away because we want people to come and join us at the Wasing Estate on August the 8th to the 10th, but tell us what your new book's about.
Oh, well, it's about things I've always been fascinated in, but haven't said much about it publicly because I felt the time wasn't really right. But the things that are hard to measure, the forces, energies behind what we do in the garden. One of the most common examples of that is biodynamic farming and gardening, where it's common in practice. If you're a biodynamic farmer gardener, you stir water before putting on what they call a preparation, and the horn manure preparation is literally fresh cow manure buried in a fresh cow horn at a certain time in the autumn, and then dug out of the ground in the spring, and very small amounts used as a kind of seed. I see it as an energy seed. But just going back to the horn itself, a cow horn is vortex shaped, and I feel that's what's important. The vortex is a really powerful creative force, which links to the Fibonacci sequence. I talk about all these things in the book. Fibonacci is where you add the two preceding numbers to get the next number. So you start with 1, you add 1 and 1, you get 2, you add 2, 1 and 2, you get 3, you add 2 and 3, you get 5, you add 3 and 5, you get 8, and so on. And that takes you on an upward spiral, and you could turn that into a kind of vortex shape. And it's just what's going on there. So I've always been fascinated to find out more. And Fibonacci is the basis of the golden rectangle as well. It spans all disciplines, all factors of our life. And in gardening, it's not been fashionable to talk about these things much, but biodynamic farmers and gardeners are famous for having really good results. And conventionally, for want of a better word, no one's really understood that. How does that make a difference? To me, it just feels right. And what I've come to realize with that, you stir the water for an hour. So you put a bit of this stuff in the water and you stir it for an hour.
When you say, sorry to interrupt, when you say stuff, what stuff do you put in?
A little thimbleful of the horn manure that was buried in a cow horn. And I actually buy what I use from the Biodynamic Association of Great Britain. And for about £5, you can get enough for an acre. And so that arrives in the post. I put it in water.
So not expensive.
Well, you're stirring the water, making a vortex one way, then you break that vortex by going the other way, and you make a vortex going the other way. And you do that for an hour. It's pretty exhausting. It's good to do it with more than one person. But I think what you're doing is, because I've since found out from doing this, which I really enjoy doing, that it's been practiced long before biodynamics only was invented or created, however you want to describe it, but after Rudolf Steiner's first lectures in 1924. And it was Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, in fact, who codified it into a practice-based method during the late 1930s. So if you go further back in history, you can find people doing this stirring. Steiner was basing what he taught, as I see it, on ancient wisdom. And it's not like the biodynamic people own that knowledge. And you can go back to people doing what they called tonsingen in Central Europe. The peasants would sing to their water while they were stirring it, apparently in a similar way to what I've just described. So that's without any of the potion from the cow horn, but sound, the power of sound. And then you think, well, where this can take you a long way, because you can get energy into water. And then, that links to the work of people like Masaru Emoto, Messages from Water. Water has memory. The work of Victor Schauberger, he was really big on water and so insightful, so far ahead of his time that he was regularly belittled and actually signed away his agreement to the American state, unfortunately, in 1955, because they wouldn't let him back from America without him doing that. And, there's happens so much through history that brilliant people get pilloried because they're too good. And so it behoves us, I feel, to look into learning more about them. There's a brilliant book about Victor Schauberger by a guy called Callum Coates, and it's called Living Energies, and it's quite technical, but it really explains Schauberger's work and why it works and how powerful it is. And he invented copper tools, for example. He realized that iron sliding through soil at any speed, as happens in ploughing, destroys or damages capillarity, which means water holding ability of soil particles. And so not using iron actually is one big step forward. If anyone's using an iron spade to do their digging, that's kind of doubly bad. And in fact, when I'm doing my digging, I use a copper spade, so at least I'm kind of missing out that bit. But yeah, there's so many. I've mentioned many things.
So many things.
Big on energy.
You can do. I was lucky enough to MC and host the Biodynamic 100 Awards last November, and there was it was a wonderful day and evening with all these biodynamic growers at the Steiner Theatre in Marylebone, and I met this fantastic company, and I'm just going to give them a shout out, Charles, because they're going to be at my festival, Walthamstow St Lawrence. Yeah, Waltham St Lawrence. I think that's it. I'll put it in the show note. And they sell the most beautiful copper tools that I have ever come
I know
across,
them.
and lots of
I know them.
that I'd
Sorry.
never discovered. Like I bought this long prong for getting the dandelion roots out because that tap root is a bit of a bastard to get out. And it was just like, oh my God, I've got a tool for it now. And they're fantastic. And they're going to be talking at the festival on the So Grow Eat stage, clean stage. And they're going to have a stall there because everybody needs to move across to copper. Now, I spoke to my sister about this, the one that watched mainstream media. And she told me that copper was really, really bad for you, and that there had been some research out of Harwell back in the 1960s. So Harwell is a research centre in Oxfordshire. And she said, oh, have you never read the research papers from Harwell? And I said, I don't believe anything that comes out of a research centre in the UK or worldwide anymore. So we had a little bit of a debate about that one. What would you say to calm anybody down and explain the benefits of, electroculture?
Oh, hang on. Can we go back to your supposed problem with copper first?
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
copper, because I use copper for electroculture.
Um, I don't like disagree with your sister, but I just feel it's such an kind of unhealthy way of trying to understand anything, to quote old research papers, because unless you're really clear what was their motive for research, and research doesn't happen out of thin air. Research is paid for by somebody, and usually there's a motive. That gets quite clear, and you can see that pattern all around us all the time. And so one research paper or whatever it was saying that copper's value, or flipping out, kind of get a life. It's the benefits of copper, and how they use copper in hospitals on doors because it's antibacterial. Then I've had people say to me, "Oh, so it's antibacterial. That means it's bad for bacteria and so." Well, that's an interesting point, actually. But it's not like you're using your copper tool that much, and you're not slicing through trillions of bacteria all the time. It's very occasional use of copper tool. But it doesn't break the capillarity and it doesn't interrupt the magnetic fields. So that's something else we know very little about. And that links to electroculture that you're asking about, because electroculture, you might even call it magnetoculture. It's those two things, forces are very interlinked. They want polarities one the other almost. So yeah, what is electroculture? And many variations. There's so many possibilities, but I think that there's been a lot more said about it that needs more backing up and understanding. And there are a few people I'm coming across who really do understand it. There's a guy in the States called Chris Winters, for example. He's got a YouTube channel. And to do it really well, you need, I think, from what I can see, to bury a wire in the ground to transmit the force you pull in from your antennae, which needs to be also pretty high, like 18, 20 feet, up to 6 meters. And that's based on the work of Filippo, who was, God, have I got the name right? It's something like that. He was a French scientist in the 1920s, 30s who had fantastic results. A million of his devices were spread across Europe before the Second World War. And then the war kind of erased all that knowledge. And maybe deliberately they can do that kind of thing. And then after the war, everyone starts using fertilizers, which are based on explosives, nitrogen, all that kind of thing. So understanding the context of these helps you understand what it's all about. But I think that electroculture is a much more serious thing. It's not just making a quick copper spiral and putting that in, which could work, incidentally, I think, because you got the intent to make it work. Because that's another factor that is really, we've all got, and it's played down. We've got the ability, the desire, the power to make these things effective. And we've been kind of told that's nonsense, don't be silly, it should be all mechanistic. So don't underestimate your own power to help all these wonderful processes be effective.
I think we have been taught very much over the last generation not to trust ourselves, but to trust
Yeah.
the government. So we're coming to the end of the podcast. Obviously, people can come and have a conversation with you in person in August. But what would you say to anybody who is still trusting our government?
What? Say again. Who's still?
What would you say to anybody that is still trusting our government on the way we grow
Oh,
and
crikey.
farm and everything else? God, I've
Um,
landed you in it there, Charles.
I would say all the evidence points in the other direction, actually. So things you're not going to hear any other side of the story in mainstream media. I think that's the first thing that many people will benefit from getting off the mainstream media and just working things out for yourself. Trust your intuition, trust your gut feeling. We come back to the gut. And I do feel that, it comes back to food, it comes back to no dig, always those kinds of basics. Trust yourself and take it from there going forwards and outwards.
What a wonderful way to end the podcast, and what sound advice. Charles Dowding, thank you so much for coming on. This has just been a highlight of my year, but it's not going to be anywhere near a highlight as meeting you in person in August. So everybody, I hope we see you there. Charles, for now, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Philly. It's been a pleasure.
And remember, everybody, the doctor of your future is you.
That's good.